All right, we are ready for document 2, and this is called Basic Principles of Human Behavior. These are things that I've outlined as the ways I want you to see working with your own life, with your parents, with your siblings, with your church, with the people in Bible school, with your dormies, all through your life. What are some basic principles that we can use to understand how we live, how we think, how we work, what's going on in our heart, what's going on in our mind? And so if you look on page 2 of that, I start outlining some specifically what those 10 items will be looking at. So let's take a look at your notes on pages 2 and 3 of document 2. Page 2 is where I start explaining the list on page 1. Basic principles of human behavior. Working with people is rewarding and challenging. There are basic principles that can be helpful in understanding some of the what and the why of human behavior. You may find these things useful in your own life and in the lives of those around you. Following is a list of principles that can be helpful for understanding yourself and understanding others. Number 1, people are complex. People have needs, and you put your own name in here. You have needs, you have longings, you have drives, you have wishes, you have gifts, you have temperaments, and you have other specific characteristics. People are body and also soul, which is mind, will, and emotion. People are spirit. From 1 Thessalonians 5:23, Psalm 139:14 says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are complex creatures indeed. Even though we are complex and sometimes we cannot understand ourselves, God understands us and His Word is sharp enough to see through our complexity. It's important to see people as complex. Do not try to reduce people to simple formulas. For example, you might have heard that you have a spiritual gift. Maybe somebody says, well, you're a prophet, so you will always behave like this. Or you are a mercy person, so you'll always behave like this. Or maybe somebody has studied temperaments and they say, well, you're a choleric, so you'll always do that. Or, there's so many ways in which we can categorize people, and all of them are kind of simplistic and they might be helpful, but at the same time, they're much too simple to explain the complexity that you are. Okay, and so we want to look at some of those things and say they can be helpful to us, but at the same time, we don't want to allow ourselves to put people into a pigeonhole where this is who they are and they're always going to behave that way. It's just not true. We are so complex. And so when we're working with people, when we're working with our own lives, we're thinking about ourselves and how we're reacting to situations, or thinking about our parents, thinking about our dormies, thinking about the people we're dating or the people, eventually we're going to live with in our homes. We're very complex people. And so we want to recognize that as part of the way God has made us. The second one then is all behavior is purposeful. And by the way, when we're finished with this, I'll open it up for discussion. And then we'll talk about any of these that we'll talk about one by one as we go through them now. All behavior is purposeful. Human behavior does not always seem to be useful, but it always has a purpose. Behaviors are not accidents. Whatever you've done today so far has not been an accident, okay? You've done it for a reason. There's a reason why you do what you do, a reason why your parents do what you do, reason why I do what I do. Every behavior has a purpose. Even when the individual does not understand the behavior, it does have a purpose, and we need to ask, what was the purpose for that behavior? What purpose did that behavior serve? We then need to bring biblical correctives to that person's life, to help them to see when their behavior is not useful. So even though behavior is always purposeful, it's sometimes not very useful. If you get upset with somebody and you decide to hit them, and you do hit them, which, happens, I grew up in a family of boys, so, we did a little bit of that, or maybe a lot of that sometimes. Was there a purpose for that hitting? Well, of course there was. We're frustrated, and that's the way boys react sometimes. But was that useful? Might not have been very useful. Okay, it might have been counterproductive. So we look at people's behavior, and we don't want to tell them there was no reason for what you did, because there was a reason. But at the same time, we might help them see that it was not very useful, and what they did was not going to help them accomplish what they're attempting to accomplish. All right, number 3, rewarded behavior will be repeated. You'd almost think this would go without saying, but if we reward behavior, it will typically be repeated. Payment for work, appreciation for kindness, honor for valor are ways to reward behaviors that we wish to have repeated. And it typically works. Rewarding wrong and harmful behaviors will produce more wrong behaviors. And so we need to think that rewarded behavior will be repeated. You may have gone to Sunday school, you may have gotten stickers on your paper, you may have gotten somebody drawing a smiley face on something you did when you were little. Maybe if you did homeschool, your mom or dad put some nice comments on your papers. This is rewarding behavior. You come to Bible school and people like you and they talk to you and you think, oh, SMBI is a pretty nice place. They really like me here because your behavior is being rewarded. You go to class and you enjoy your time and people like your shirt or your dress or your sweater or whatever. We're rewarding your behavior and then we tend to repeat those behaviors. It can work the other way though also. It can be true that if somebody's behavior is not appropriate, like the naughty boy in school, right? It would not have been any of you, but you probably remember a naughty boy somewhere along the way in church or school, and they did something that was wrong, inappropriate, or naughty, and they got noticed for it, right? If they get noticed, you just rewarded their behavior. What do you think is going to happen? Probably more naughtiness, right? And so we have to be careful what behavior we reward and how we reward it. And so we'll talk about that more as time goes along. Number 4, if stimuli are perceived as real, the effects will be real. If we believe appreciation is real, we'll respond as if it is. If we perceive disrespect to be real, we will respond to that. So it's important to be kind and caring at all times, even when we do not feel like it. The kindness and caring will typically produce positive effects. Threats can produce fears and negative effects. Actions precede attitudes. Right actions often produce right attitudes, and vice versa. So what does this mean? This gets a little bit more complicated here, but if someone says something very kind to you, you probably will respond as if it was meant to be real. Hopefully it was. We do respond to people when we believe that their appreciation is real. And many times in working with people, I'll get a husband or a wife who will say, well, I just don't feel like I love her anymore, or I just don't feel like I can respect him anymore. Okay, so how do we work with something like that? How do we work with something like that in your life? Well, if we can get you to do right behaviors, and we'll talk about that a little bit later also, if we can do right behaviors, even when you don't feel like you want to, those right behaviors will be interpreted as appreciative, okay? Those right behaviors were interpreted as understood to reinforce what the person's doing. So when we produce a stimulus, that stimulus is going to be responded to in that other individual. Illustration I often use is if we would tell you today that there's a lion in the hallway. If you believe that, you probably won't go out in the hallway, right? If you perceive that stimulus as real, you probably will keep the door closed. If you do not perceive it as real, you'll probably open the door and go out anyway, because you don't think there's a lion out there. Okay. So I remember a situation where I was working with a young couple, and they were married maybe a year or two, and they were not getting along. Things were not going well. This guy was, he was on his computer all the time. He wasn't doing bad things, but he was just not engaged with his wife. And she was so angry, and she was talking to me like through her teeth like that. She hates this guy. I'm thinking, whatever, how can we fix this problem? So what I told her to do was, so when he's working on his computer, just come up behind him, put your hand on his shoulder, stand there 20 seconds, walk away. Half an hour later, do the same thing. Okay, maybe stay 30 seconds. Okay. And after a while, he'll start turning around and looking to see what you want, And so I was just using this principle here, that when the stimuli are perceived as real, the effects will be real. He interpreted that as her caring, okay? And she didn't nag, and she didn't say anything. But after a while, he wanted to know what she wants, okay? And so aren't we complicated people? It takes sometimes difficult little things like this to get through to our heart and get through to a man's mind or get through to a woman's heart so that we can actually get inside of that person's life. It worked. And I'm not guaranteeing you that I always have the answers. I don't. And you won't either. But we need to remember that when we talk to somebody kindly, probably we're going to get a kind response. Probably there's going to be a response in that person's heart that's going to be positive. So we need to think about doing that. Okay, number 5, people return to places of unresolved conflict. We need resolution for conflicts, and we need forgiveness from sin. When these things do not occur, we return repeatedly to them, or else we carry them with us everywhere we go. So many times there are people who have unresolved conflict with mom or dad, with a school teacher, with a spouse, with a neighbor, with a dormie. How do we deal with this? It's really important that we resolve those conflicts. It's important that we communicate. We'll talk about that in number 6 here. It's important we communicate. Do you understand how you hurt me? Do you understand what you did was not helpful? Do you understand that what you said was really harmful to me? That really did hurt me very badly. If we don't do that, we're going to have sort of a backlog of unresolved conflicts. People we don't forgive. People with whom we just have this, as soon as somebody says their name, we come up with this anger or hostility or maybe fear. Or maybe we go hide. When that person comes around the corner at church, we go the other way. Or when that person sits close to us, we sort of freeze, okay? That's unresolved conflict. It's really important that we don't have a list of those things. You can get a list of unresolved conflicts in your life that eventually will just tear you apart. And eventually the list gets so complicated, we don't even know how to deal with it. So let's try to be careful that we don't have those unresolved conflicts, because it's like, it's a crazy illustration here, but my little dog used to kill chickens. My grandpa didn't like that my dog was killing his chickens. So one day, after he killed one of the chickens, my grandpa took a bale twine and tied the chicken to the dog's collar. So everywhere the dog went, the chicken went along, right? And it cured this dog of killing chickens. And it's kind of an illustration of the way, if we have issues in our life, we drag them everywhere that we go. It's a weight on us. It's a weight on our heart. It's a weight on our mind. It's a weight on our life. And we don't resolve them, they're going to go with us. Okay. So if it's something for which you need to get forgiveness, make sure you do that. If it's an issue you've got with somebody, try and get that resolved. Okay. Number 6, feelings not talked out will be acted out. People need to talk. Some of us are good at talking. Some of us talk a little too much. Some of us don't talk enough. But we need to talk. We are made to talk. When people do not express their feelings with words, the feelings come out in physical ways. Certainly with guys, this is true, right? Sometimes I can get upset with something going on in a shop, and I just have to hit the bench with the hammer a little bit, and it feels kind of good. You didn't hurt anybody, but it's feelings that maybe there's nobody there to talk to, and maybe the tractor's not listening. But the feelings are going to come out some way if they don't come out verbally. And so we want to make sure that we're learning how to talk out the situations in our lives. Feelings come out in physical ways. Unexpressed anger can turn violent. You have anger in your life and you're not getting it dissipated by talking about it, not going to the right people. After a while, that anger kind of builds up. And that's kind of stuff that can turn violent. And we're seeing this with the school shootings and the other things that are going on in our world today. We're seeing this happen. That people are not talking out, they're not expressing their feelings, and these unexpressed affections can be displaced. They get displaced to other people, they'll get displaced to animals or inanimate objects. Just like I said, you can take a hammer and hit the bench. Or, I've heard ladies say it's fun to make bread because they can just really get their hands into there and tear that dough all to pieces. You can get some of those feelings worked out that are hard to talk out. It's important to learn to communicate effectively. When people are acting out, it's important to find out the underlying feelings and help them express the feelings because that's going to be helpful in constructive ways. So you see somebody who's acting out, what are they doing? Maybe they're just talking constantly. Or maybe they're hiding. You can't find them and they're up in their room, right? Or they're in the dorm room. They don't want to talk to anybody. These are actions, and these are actions that are not being talked out, and so they're going to be acted out. You see some young man pull out with his car or truck, and he's jamming gears and got the pedal to the floor, and there's something going on there, okay? This is an action that's not being expressed some other way. Or two guys are fighting, or two girls are arguing, or they're crying, and we need to do these things sometimes. But at the same time, we need to be very careful that we're keeping the backlog of feelings talked out, so we don't have this, all these things that we're dragging along with us. Number 7, people assume that the way they were treated as children is, first of all, the way they deserve to be treated as adults, and is the way they will tend to treat other people. Persons who were abused may assume that they do not deserve gentle treatment. Persons doted on by parents typically expect people to meet their every whim all through life. The way we were treated as children becomes our home concept. The home concept tends to define life's choices. We gravitate to what feels like home. These really are fairly important concepts here. The home concept is what feels normal to you. So if you were treated very well as a child, and you're a young man, and your mother always doted on you, and she always picked up your dirty socks and made sure she made exactly the kind of cake you like and all that kind of thing, you'll think everybody in the world is going to treat you like that, and you'll need a good wife to make sure that she does all those kinds of things. And if she was raised in a home where maybe they didn't treat people like that, they treated people with a little bit more responsibility, and then she'll expect more responsibility of you. And if you don't do that, things could get a little bumpy in your house, okay? And so if you're a young lady who has been treated abusively, and there's a young man who wants to date you, and he treats you so very well, is that going to feel like home? It won't feel like home. And we get these girls who date one young man after the next, and they're all the same quality and caliber and not very good. And we start asking ourselves, what's going on here? And we discover that maybe they were not treated well somewhere along the way. And so somebody treats them well, it doesn't feel like home. It doesn't feel normal. They wouldn't know how to react if a young man brought them flowers or opened the door for them and so on. And so it's very important that we treat people well, but it's also important that we think about the way we've been treated, because the way we are treated is the way we think we deserve to be treated all the way through life. And it can be very, very negative, or it can be very, very positive. It's also the way we will tend to treat other people as we raise our own families, as we go into a place like Bible school, and the way we treat our dormies or the cooks or the teachers or the students or whoever we're interacting with. We will tend to have a tendency to treat them the way we were treated. Okay, let's move on to number 8. Emotional injury causes defensive behaviors that, if they're not healed, will impact all of life. All persons are emotionally injured. It's something we'll talk about when we get to document 3. Every one of us has injury. We talked about it yesterday that everybody has a scar somewhere, right? And we also have emotional scars, because we've all have emotional injury. No question about it. Some of them are very slight, some of them are very complicated, but we all have them. It's important that we get healing for those injuries, just as it's important that we get healing for physical injuries. So many persons have received healing for those injuries, and we can receive healing for those injuries. If we don't receive healing for them, we'll be very defensive if those injuries are not healed. We can find healing by forgiveness and the grace of God. As the injuries are healed, the defensive behaviors will diminish. This is very, very important. You look at somebody, you look at your own life, somebody else's life, and you see defensive behaviors. I had a graphic illustration of this in my life. When I was 30 years old, I was putting the cows in the barn, and one heifer decided she didn't want to go in. So I was young and strong and fast, and I determined she's not going to beat me, and she was determined to beat me, and she did. And I landed on the concrete on my knee and broke my kneecap in half, and had to have surgery and all that painful stuff. And during that year of recovery from knee surgery, I was pretty defensive. I had 3 little girls who'd like to come and run and jump on Daddy's lap. And do you think I allowed that to happen? No, that would have hurt, okay? So when they came running, my hands went out, right? That's a response. It's a defensive response because of pain. Emotionally, we're the same way. So if you get talking with someone and there's a subject you get to and their hands go out, okay, or they turn around or they hide or all of a sudden they can't talk, what are they saying? What are you saying if that happens to you? You're saying, oh, something hurts here. Something's painful. And so we develop defensive behaviors, and we'll talk more about those. This is just an introduction. So if we have defensive behaviors, we know that there's an injury. There's an injury that's not healed. My knee's been healed a long time. My grandchildren want to jump on my lap. I don't even think about it. It never occurs to me that I've got a broken knee, even though one of my knees only has half of a kneecap in it. It never occurs to me unless I'm thinking about it like now. Why? Because it's healed, and so it's no longer defensive. The same thing is true with emotional injuries. If we have emotional injuries and we get defensive, that defense is always going to be there as long as the pain is there. We experience healing for those things, the defenses start to drop. Does this make sense to you? Okay? So how can we know when we're experiencing healing? How can we know when somebody else is experiencing healing? When those defenses drop, we know the healing is starting to happen. Okay? And eventually can go away. The scar is there. If I look at my knee, do you think there's scars on my knees? I've been rough on my knees, okay? I have scars all over both knees. When I see the scar, I remember the event. When I don't look at the scar because it's healed, I don't think about it. The same thing's true of you emotionally. You may have an emotional scar. That means it's healed. You don't even think about it. You live your life without defenses. But if somebody reminds you of what happened or what somebody said to you or somebody did to you, there's the scar, okay? And the scar brings back the memory. But the scar also proves that it was healed and you're living without defenses, okay? Aren't we complicated people? We are complex. Number 9, it's always right to do right. We need to act in correct and appropriate ways even when we don't feel like doing what's right. We need to obey parents and the Bible even when we do not understand why. Obedience is never wrong. This is really important. I hear people telling me, I just don't feel like listening to the church. I don't feel like listening to my parents. Well, we can't resolve all those things right here, right now. But obedience, doing right is always right. Obedience to God's word is never wrong. We always make sure that we understand that. Obedience is always right. Obedience to what is right and biblical will bring blessing to all involved. We don't wait till we feel like doing what's right. It's always right to do right. An illustration I've used over the years is some boys in school. We had a substitute teacher one day, and you know what you do to substitute teachers if you're in school. You make sure you can tell them anything, right? If you went to a school. Well, the teacher came in my office and said, these boys won't behave. And okay, send them in. So send in the boys. What's going on? Well, this teacher's she's just unreasonable. We don't need to listen to her. She doesn't know what she's doing. I said, well, she's the teacher. You need to apologize. Mr. Reed, look, if we apologize, we'll be telling a lie. I can't apologize. I can't tell a lie. You don't want me to lie, do you? Oh my, what do we have to put up with as teachers, right? So, you pray for the Holy Spirit's wisdom to teach you what to say. And all of a sudden it occurred to me. I said, well, suppose you go home this evening and your mom's sitting on the sofa reading a magazine and you don't smell any supper. And after a while, you get hungry and you say, Mom, what's for supper? And Mom says, I just didn't feel like making supper today. And you don't want me to live a lie, do you? You don't want me making supper when I don't feel like it and I don't really want to. Okay, we'll go apologize. They got the message. It's always right to do what's right, even when we don't feel like it. And we have to be careful that we don't hide behind our own defenses and hide behind somebody else's actions that maybe the teacher was wrong, okay? But we can't hide behind things that are like that when really the person who's doing their best and they're doing what they should be doing, and we need to be careful. Always right to do right. Number 10, every person deserves respect. We need to respect people as we attempt to bring healing into their lives. People deserve to be respected. Respect will earn you a hearing with most people if they know you care and you treat them with respect, whoever they are. It may be the policeman on the road. It may be the person in the next dorm. It may be somebody in a lunch line. Can we treat people with respect? Treat people with respect all the time. And we will find that respect coming back to us. All right, in closing to this, and then we'll open it up for discussion, unhealthy people produce unhealthy behaviors and unhealthy family. Healthy people produce healthy behaviors and healthy families and healthy communities and healthy churches and healthy schools. And so I share these principles with the prayer that they'll be useful in producing godly and healthy individuals. Well, what do you think? I will open this up now for your discussion for the next 20 minutes on these basic principles. I think they're quite important. That's why we begin with them. And hopefully there'll be things that you will remember. I'll probably ask you to remember some of them for a test. So I'm sure I've created some questions in some people's minds. So what questions or comments do you have? So the question would be, how do we learn to react in a correct way, in a proper way, when we're approached, even when we have emotional injury in our own lives? Okay. That's a very difficult question. How can we do that? Because if I have a great deal of emotional injury in my life, almost anything you do or say to me is going to evoke defensive behaviors. And so I think one of the purposes of classes like this would be so that we learn to find those damaged emotions within us. And so if you find yourself many times reacting in a defensive way, then start asking yourself, what is it? What's going on in there? Why am I being defensive? Ask yourself the question. See if you can determine that. And if you can't, have a trusted friend. Talk to a trusted friend about it and say, I discovered that whenever some people talk with me, I get these huge emotional reactions, and I'm just wondering, what is it? Is there something you can see in my life that can help me understand? Okay. And if you can find somebody who is full of goodness and knowledge and is able to admonish you, that would be a trusted friend. Somebody you can trust and bear your emotions to this person and say, every time Mr. Smith talks to me, I just get this complete defensive behavior. I want to run away, I want to hide, or I want to talk back in an unkind way. And, evaluate that yourself and talk to someone else about it and see if they can help you through that. And of course, reading the scripture where we see ourselves. Okay. We read the Bible, and so many times I discover the truth of the word that the Holy Spirit applies to your life as you read it. Oh, I just needed that verse today. Okay. The question is, how do you respond to an individual who is always defensive no matter what you say to them? Well, it may be because of a history you have with the person. I mean, do you have a long-standing history with this person because this person and you just don't get along very well? Are there unresolved things in the past that need to be resolved so that we can go ahead without the reaction? On the other hand, there are people who are very strict about what they believe and on doctrinal issues. And so if you approach somebody on a doctrinal issue, they may not even be willing to hear you. If somebody is always reactive, then you have to ask yourself, is this inside of me or is this inside of them? It may be them. It may be you. But if it is them, then what we want to try and do is make sure, first of all, that our own hearts are right, and then try to approach them in a way that will help them understand whether or not their heart is right. The question is, as I understand it, what if you have an issue with someone else or you sense unresolved conflict, but they do not sense that, or you don't know if they do or not? So it's constantly bothering you because of a sense of unresolved conflict with an individual or a situation. Well, that's very difficult. I usually say that I think the best approach is not to make the situation worse. If there's some way you can find out if that person has an issue with you, that's what I try to do as gently as possible. If they do not realize that there's a problem and there's really no actual open sin involved, I usually say, take that to God yourself and get that resolved. Find a mutual friend or find a trusted friend you can go to. I really am big on the idea of having good friends who can walk with you, people you can trust. Everybody needs, I'm on a little detour here, but everybody needs people they can trust. So is there somebody you can trust implicitly? And you can go and say, I've got this issue with this individual. I don't think they know about it. It's bothering me. Could you help me work through that? And if you can have your heart clean and open and pure before God, and this other person doesn't know about it, I would say that I've seen too many situations where somebody went to somebody, and I might go to someone and say, it just seems like there's something you don't like about me. And they say, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. So I've just lit a powder keg of problems that did not exist. Okay. So I usually advise not to do that. But make sure that there is peace in your heart. Make sure your attitude's right, and get someone else involved, somebody you can trust, someone who can say, well, it looks to me like, from what I can understand from God in the scripture, that your heart is clean and pure. Okay. And maybe there's something else that's causing that issue in your life.